everyone. Today we have a special guest, Oscar Dufour, a PhD researcher at the Institute of Light and Matter in Lyon, France. His work focuses on the fascinating field of crowd dynamics and traffic, a topic that offers valuable insights into how people and vehicles move in complex environments. Without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Oscar.
Hi everyone. So I will maybe introduce myself in quite a few words. So I am Oscar Dufour. So I am currently postdoc researcher. So at as you said in ILM in Lyon. It is in the south east of France. And so I just finished. So I defended my PhD on December. So last December. And so it was about, as you said, crowd dynamics, and there was also a bit of traffic. And I will just then also just talk about myself in general. So my educational background. So I have a bachelor in theoretical physics. Then I moved to complex system. So it's a general words, but that gather a lot of fields, but physics, but there is also active matter, a bit of neuroscience, a bit of statistics and probability. So it was a master between 3 universities. So there is Torino in Italy, there is CISA and ICTP in Trieste, still in Italy, and also in Paris, the Sorbonne University. So I had courses in these three schools. After my master, I studied a bit. So before doing a PhD, I was a research engineer for 1 year, and so in that year I studied neuroscience. So it's a bit different, but actually there are some common tools that are shared between neuroscience and also statistical mechanics and also crowd dynamics. And then I wanted to go, at a larger scale of behavior. So I started with say at the individual scale with the neuroscience, but then I went to a larger scale with assembly of individuals, with crowds. And actually there are quite a few people in France that are doing that are studying crowds, and some of them were in Lyon, so I just moved to Lyon to do that.
Can I say just listening to you, actually, I'm a little bit jealous as a person who's curious in different topics. You studied neuroscience,
Okay.
physics, and also statistics.
Mhm.
And you are also now working with the crowd dynamics. And okay, that's a lot, and I think that's very interesting. As a person, like I'm just doing astronomy as a hobby, but still trying to struggling with fitting in different topics. But anyhow, I think this like studying different fields also gives you kind of different perspective on decision making, because you will see things from different perspective as well. Anyhow, I'm very interested. So can you introduce the core motivation behind your research and explain why understanding crowd dynamics is critical for large scale events?
Yes. So I would say that in my area of crowd dynamics, so there are different approaches. So either you are looking for practical problems, issues, and that there is a problem with crowds. So you may help, for instance, people who are managing crowds the city who are try to manage to manage large scale events. Or you can also speak about a theoretical point of view and try to understand what could be interesting from the theoretical point of view studying crowds with respect to other domain of physics, such as active matter or statistical physics. So, so I think I will speak about these two things. So first, the practical things. So I had the opportunity to discuss with people with the organizers of the one big event in Lyon, which is the Festival of Lights. It's a big event that occur each December, and it spans over 4 consecutive days, and it gather millions of people each year. So there was a need. They were quite interested in finding new ways of managing crowds and understand how it works, because for now they just use rules of thumbs. They just also have talkie-walkies and cameras, and if there is a problem, in the at some point in the crowd, then they will just send policemen, directly there, and they will try to make the thing smoother. But there is not. They are there for the moment. They are not really aware of some possibility of some ways, rational ways of managing crowds. And for us, it's quite interesting because they offer cameras, they offer visibilities, they offer a lot of facilities, and it could be quite great to interact with them. This is for Lyon, but there is, I don't know if you know the YouTube channel Philoscopy, but maybe it's in French, but it's a YouTube channel that talks about crowds also. But it's a guy who is in Germany and who studies collective behaviors. So it's not only about crowds, but it's also about behaviors, politics, but from scientific perspective. So it's very interesting. And this guy was a PhD student of Elbing, and Elbing is a very famous guy in crowd dynamics. And there is one paper about pilgrimage to Mecca. So pilgrimage is when you go to Mecca for religious purposes, and it appears that there are some problems during the flow of people. And each year there are many. Each year in the past there were many deaths. So one challenge for that Elbing was to try to understand crowds and try to model them so that he could anticipate possible crowd disaster. So he did it, and actually after his work, there was almost no more crowd disaster. Just that a few years ago there was a big trouble, but it's for different reasons. And so there is that dialogue between researcher and people who are managing a large scale event, which can be interesting which can help, both side.
So
And that yeah.
sorry to interrupt. So before the in the event there's used to be some okay deaths or there could be some bad circumstances, and now with the implementation of science it comes to into solution, specifically crowd dynamic studies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but so here we have a clear example with a pilgrimage to Mecca, but it's a very specific example because it's a very specific case in the sense that the densities are quite high.
Mhm.
And so, um, even with a simple model, you can do interesting things.
Mhm.
Then, uh, for instance, when it comes to the case of Festival of Light in Lyon, the densities are totally different. They are so in pilgrimage to Mecca, there are over 6, 7 pedestrians per square meter. So you are like blocked almost. Can move, but you don't have a lot of space.
Yeah,
Whereas in Lyon, you still have some space around you, and the dynamics is very different. And
I
so
yeah
require more complex model than the one that are being used to do.
I think that's interesting because as you were talking about um the situations in a festival of light, I just remembered that it was somehow international news in South Korea. There was similar situation. I forgot the name of the street, but yeah, that
Yeah,
people got packed in one place.
yeah, I remember. Yeah, there was a big crowd disaster, and if I remember well, it was for during Halloween,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, and there were far more than 1,100 deaths. So it was a big
yeah.
problem. But it's and what is also interesting is the fact that the situation were quite similar between Seoul, so the disaster in Seoul, and the crowd disaster in the pilgrimage to Mecca,
Mhm.
because so in Seoul it was two flows of people that were something
Going against, yeah. Mhm.
yeah merged. And in pilgrimage to Mecca, there was also that kind of stuff, but also there is also the bottleneck situation. So in which you start with a large, let's say large space to move, and then
Mhm.
there is the shrink and the density of people increase specifically at this location, which can lead to over compression.
Mhm.
Then you can't breathe
Yeah,
and
yeah. So I'm trying to understand in your research, specifically in Festival of Lights. We will come later about your experience, in-field experience, but just for me interesting that we have these events happening, big crowds with a lot of people, and therefore we have at the same time big data being collected. We have cameras and we have also maybe other um, data collection. I'm not aware. I can just think of the cameras at the moment. And so basically, based on this, you want to avoid such. Do we say it a clutter, or how do we say it? It's just like a blockage in the crowd where it goes into it becomes a big problem.
so I think so there are different purposes maybe. So in for high density situation, then you want to avoid this kind of situation. So you will rely on observables such as the flow, the density, the number of contact, that kind of observables. But
Mhm.
then for and for our case, so in Lyon for the Festival of Light, so we don't have the same densities. So of course we would like to avoid at most as possible this. So these are still observables that we can look at or try to replicate. But what also we would like to improve, maybe it's to look at it's also other observables such as so the what people are usually doing. So if they want, if they have a clear idea of where to go, or if they go like a random walker
Mhm.
in all the streets trying to look at something, or if they have something clear in mind. So it's more so this can be, I mean, large scale observables. But then you can there are many kind of observable you can look at, and what also could be interested is to improve. It's also the experience of the user, um, more than maybe the possibility of death, because possibility of death is quite it can happen, but it would be much difficult. I mean, if you are doing things in the wrong way, then you can provoke it. But
Yeah,
yeah, so mm,
so very you have to be extremely careful with
mm,
the proposals or decision making that you're okay. I think when you said that if they have something in mind or if they're random walker, that sounds a little bit scary to me because okay, people looking at my behavior can already make decisions about me. Anyhow, we will talk about it later. Maybe I'm just too much generalizing. Um, a month into my doctoral contact contract in Lyon, my supervisor encouraged me to shift from reading scientific papers about crowd dynamics to observing pedestrians in their natural environment. So this is about the multi-scale field study at the Festival of Lights in Lyon. Can you
mhm.
talk about it more?
Yeah. So it's yeah. I said that. So at the beginning, so I was looking, I was at the bus station. I wanted to find something interesting to study, to understand in pedestrians' behavior. And so at first, I saw there were some people that were sitting, that were standing up, but next to each other. They were forming some patterns, not trivial patterns. And so this has not been at all studied in, I mean, almost not at all studied in crowd literature. But I mean, this is interesting, but um, as it is static, it's yeah, I know it's a different physics, and yeah, me. I wanted also to deal with some equation of motion and stuff like that, and so going to so to higher densities and to moving people was also an idea, and so we needed to find things to study, and so there was a festival of light in Lyon. So we collabor so we asked so we first we had a meeting with organizers. We explained them what we wanted to do, what could be interested for them. And then they saw that something interesting could happen from that interaction. So they all allow us to use their cameras, and to make some measurements during the Festival of Lights. Because also one has to know that it is very strict, and so it requires some preparation because you can't enter with a bag, for instance. I mean, they will look at your what is inside your bag. So at first we wanted, to measure also contacts between pedestrians. So we asked because I mean, but so we wanted to wear like a jacket, a contact jacket, so to measure contacts between force between contact forces between people when they are pushed.
Mhm.
Um, but then we realized that the policeman would not allow that, so we had to find other ways and to discuss with the organizer to find some ways to do that in another way, but which could still be beneficial for us. Yeah, that's the idea. So the dialogue with yeah, it was quite interesting. But also there is also something else, is the fact that um, so I am studying crowds, but I collaborated with three others laboratories, so three other teams. There was one team in Toulouse. They are ma- they are more specialized in informatics and neural networks. There is one team in Jülich more specialized in experiments, and one team in Wuppertal, so in Germany. So Jülich and Wuppertal are in Germany, and they are more specialized. So the guy in Wuppertal in mathematics.
Mhm.
You know, there was people from different backgrounds, and we met together in Lyon to study that festival of lights, and this would also not have been possible alone. So it's a very collaborative project, let's say.
Yeah, it's
Mm.
interesting that it's also, how to say it, being involved behind the organization, how the organization goes of the big events. I think that's within itself is quite interesting, but that you are also trying to make a research there during the event, collecting the data. I think with the timing pressing, and you have to also come up with the research questions and how do you design your experiment. I think that's quite a challenge, but yeah,
Mhm.
I've been going through also your PhD thesis, and mm, in one of the parts you mentioned that traditional models often simplify pedestrians as circular disks with idealized interaction. What led you to move beyond these simplifications, and what were the shortcomings of simplified representations, and how does your model incorporate more realistic pedestrian shapes and interactions?
Yeah. So I think this is a bit deeper. So I think so now. So there are different. I think the first step is to define some observable that we want to replicate.
Mhm.
Because when studying crowds, it's quite difficult and complex, and because it gather a lot of different topics. There are can tackle the problem from a psychologist point of view, sociological point of view, from physicists, from mathematics. There are many ways of tackle the problem, and so we can first define our observable. And so when you look at the crowds inside, when you look at some videos, so here is the city center of Lyon. In blue, it's the perimeter within there is the Festival of Lights.
Mhm.
And then the Festival of Lights, it consists of several light displays that are on buildings. And so each dot is a light which is displayed. So here are some example.
Mhm.
There is here on Square Terreau and here on Square Saint-Jean. It's quite nice. And so when also here on below. And so we ask people then after the show is finished to exit. But what I will play again the video. But what is interesting is that there are some people who are static. So it's not everyone is moving at the same time and in a robotic way. There's the fact that um, there is heterogeneity in the behaviors, and it seems it's something which is important and quite complex to replicate because it's harder to simulate heterogeneous flows and then to understand them. And it's what happening there. So there are people who are so here it's harder to see, but if you zoom and you analyze the flows precisely, you see that there are some people who are static. There are some people who are going up, but there are some also people who are going down.
Mhm.
This could be quite counterintuitive. But there are some people who are going down. Uh, Actually, I don't know why, but it happens, and it can perturb the flows. But yeah, and quite interestingly, um, current models, so they are using they are modeling pedestrians as simple disk.
Mhm.
But if you use these basics, this simple model, then you will predict a very high number of contacts. The people will always colliding simply because there is not a proper distinction between a mechanical layer and a decisional layer, and they are not properly uh, designed for that situation. It works, for high densities and very low density case, but for this case with a density which is around 2 to 4 pedestrians per square meter, it fails completely. And there is a need to change these models. So to change, then I can pick up if I can, three, let's say three categories or three observable that may be quite very simple, but it's still not replicated by current models that deal with crowds.
This is the spherical that we are talking about, that
Yeah.
instead of
Exactly.
more complex, we just make a simple sphere and then assume that it's a person. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
actually, our bodies are different. Also, body mass of every person is also somehow different as well. So you try to make it more realistic, like seeing the
Exactly.
people from the top. Mhm.
There is, as you see, there is the density. So if you just use a simple disk to model pedestrians,
Mhm.
then you are able to replicate in a high density case only 4 pedestrians per square meter. But what we observe is that first in the Festival of Light, there are peaks to 4.5 pedestrians per square meter. So it's more. And so if you look at the evacuation scenario, then you have much more of in that case, in the case of Garcia Martin and collaborators, it's around 8 pedestrians per square meter near the door entrance. So
Okay, so it's
still not replicated. but also there is a sneaking behavior. So just the fact that people can rotate their body. So,
Mm.
if the shape is circular, then it is isotropic. Then there is not the notion of rotation.
Yeah.
But when you introduce some anisotropy, then you are able to rotate and to avoid some possible collision.
So
And yeah,
yeah, because the area of the sphere and also the size of the sphere is different, therefore your statistics at the end would be also vary based on it's not a sphere. How do I call it? It's somehow different, and therefore the yeah. Okay,
yeah,
this is
exactly. Because if you model, so if you say that the diameter of the disk is equal to the b-deltoid brass,
yeah.
so then you will you may not enter, you may not exit through some narrow door. But then the problem is that if you in your model you say, so I just shrink the diameter,
Yeah, we just sneak in just
uh,
from the crowd. Yeah.
but then the problem is that you have higher flows. So you have higher flow, and so you have much more people that can pass in the corridor
Mm.
per unit of time, and which is not so you are overestimating the actual flow. So there's the need. There is really a need of a shape that is not circular, that is anisotropic. And then why we use specifically that shape is because, so you can say that people are ellipse, but you just that it's not, you doesn't rely on data. And so what we wanted to do is to create a shape that relied on medical data.
Mhm.
So to have something a bit stronger, and for instance, and so we I just look at some medical studies. They work. There is in particular some physician from the Visible Human Project, but it's a bit gore what I will say, but they cut the bodies of the dead people in some slices, and then they took photos.
Mm.
And me, yeah, what I did is simply I extracted the contour of each slices, and then I superimposed them one on top of each other. Okay, so yeah, so here you see here, so I superimposed all the contour of each slice, let's
Mm.
say, and we are left with that kind of a 2D projection of that body. So this is for a male, but then there is also the same but for a woman. So here you see the hands. Here there is the head, and in blue you can see it's not very clear, but the foot.
Mhm.
But then if you want, you can also see it. And so then what we did was simply to cover, to try to find a shape. So to cover it with disc, And so if you cover that shape with disc, then you have the little shape I uh, I show you. Maybe I will. So here there is. So then we simply superimposed. So a few circles over that shape. So here there is one circle for the shoulder, two circles for the shoulders,
Mhm.
then two for the pectoral muscles, and then here one for the belly. And why we use the disk is simply the fact that from a numerical point of view and a modeling point of view, it's much easier to define an interaction, a mechanical interaction with a disk, rather than with other shapes like ellipsoid or that kind of stuff. Yeah, and then also we what was interesting, so there is that shape that also we had to extend that shape to other people because we are not the same into a crowd. There are heterogeneous uh, measures. So people have not the same height, have not the same deltoid breast or chest depth, and so we have to also rely on anthropometric database, and yeah. So this is it. It was quite interesting to do, and also there is maybe now I can also talk about the interactions because we have a shape, but the interaction is quite also difficult because in principle it's a 3D contact. You know, you can make a contact with your hands, with your foot, with your head, but then but it's maybe not relevant, or maybe it is, but in some specific cases. But for our what we wanted to replicate, or the observable we wanted to replicate, it was not something which we need to go in too much detail. So we simply used granular material interaction. So it's a simply here you have a springs in parallel with the dashpot, and here you have the same for the tangential contact. So then you reduce the complexity in these simple interactions, and then with this simple interaction, you are still able to replicate quite complex phenomenon. So you don't also need to to try to model everything, to try to add all the details as much as much details as possible. You can simply pick the right ingredients, the ones that will make the model replicate some observable, I would say. But then the main challenge is that also we don't know first at the beginning which ingredient we should put into the model before doing all that process of modeling, confronting to experimental data, etc.
Yeah, because at the point you have to stop at a certain point, because if you keep adding, trying to make a perfect resolution or depiction of reality, you have to give up on certain points. You have to not give up, maybe compromise on certain points, and try to focus on the main research question that is, in your case, was crowd dynamics. But I'm actually super this is something like really interesting to see that that you take a really good in scientific perspective, of course, a very scientific approach on capturing the human body, like overcoming the circular representation. So you didn't just use the random shape as replacing the assumption with assumption. You just replaced with the real scientific based the calculations. That's, I think, great. And also, I think one point, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not sure, but most of the times the research, when the researchers do their research, and it's actually most of the times is implemented in different research area. So, and it seems to me that the all the work that you're doing, sometime some researcher will find it, and they would make a great use of it. It's just how also like the COVID got discovered actually, uh, anti-vaccine in US because no one wasn't paying that much of an attention to, and even the Nobel Prize winner Catalina Corico, she was also saying that actually no one much cared about her research, but she kept doing it, and at the end, actually, she saved the world. To be, yeah. Um. Okay. So yeah. Well, I will just try to narrow down because if I keep going into, I think I will just keep going forever. But one of the key novelty in your work is the integration of decision making layer. So, can you elaborate on how pedestrian decisions, such as choosing their desired speed and path, are modeled alongside physical interactions? This is the scary part that I want to really discuss more.
Yeah, yeah. This is so this was quite difficult and to approach and also to rationalize. And it took me some time.
Mhm.
I can share my screen.
Yes, please.
So what can I maybe as a simple as a first approach, maybe let's say that let's understand how people they are working. So they to walk you just make a step, you know. So you just make a step. So you could say that your decision is just the choice of the next position. Then the problem is that if you do this, then you have to make a decision each time you are making a step. So you do decision all the time. The problem of that is that is simply that then you are always active in your process of working, and so you may not be able, for instance, to look at your phone or to discuss with someone while you are working. This is so from this you start to understand that choosing define a decision as simply the choice of the next position is not something which is natural. Then you can simply go to the next order in time and just say assume. So this is an assumption that people they choose. So you define the decision as simply the choice of the next velocity. So a translational velocity and a rotational velocity. That way, you can just say that you make a decision. So you want to go at that speed over maybe some time, and then you will update your decision um, after some times. So if I need to take an image or a situation that is common when you are driving, you press on the accelerator pedal. So you are making a decision of going at some speed. Okay? And then you don't move. You are just keeping your feet at some position, and you go always at the next speed until there is an event. And in that case, you will adapt. So you will make a next decision, a new decision, and you will adapt your velocity. That so the idea in so in our models, this is the idea of a decision. But then how that velocity is chosen? So we relied here on some way of modeling that is not new in the sense that it comes from physics and in particular statistical physics with the idea of minimizing the cost. Okay, and so the idea is that, uh, for instance, the Newton's law, you know you to find the Newton's law, you minimize some action. And here the idea is to find the next velocity, you will minimize some cost function that depends that gather some constraint. The
Which
idea is that
sorry to interrupt. I need to specify which.
the mass times the acceleration is equal to sum of forces.
Mhm.
The general Newton's law is that
For
you will know
acceleration.
yeah. And so the idea is that the idea is that minimize an energy is common in when you study also neuroscience. So I mean, it's present. It exists. It's a way of doing things. So it's just minimize of some functional or of some quantity, and this is a framework that we can apply to a lot of different areas and subject. And then there are some assumptions behind that we can talk about them, but we started we wanted to, I mean, to then also to make some links between our crowd dynamics and also previous areas of physics. And also, as we have a background, I have a background in physics. I have tools from physics, and so I can also use these tools, to study in that way crowd dynamics.
Mhm.
The idea is that you have a decision. So your decision is a choice of a velocity. That velocity can be constrained. So, for instance, you want to go to a school, so you have some desire to go to the school. So there is a cost associating with that constraint. But you have also biomechanical constraint, and in particular the fact that we have muscles, and we can't go to infinite velocity. So there is a cost in going to some speed, to some specific speed. And also this is quite um, um, like I said, stupid, but it's very simple, but it's really important. But the fact that you can't work from behind, you know, so you can, but not for a long time. So there is a cost, a constraint on the alignment between your desired velocity and the orientation of your body. But then so this is when you are alone. But then when you add some people around you, then there is maybe you want to avoid some
Mhm.
collision with someone around you. So there should be a collision avoidance constraint, and also there is what we have called, what we call the desire to preserve its own bubble private space. The idea is that when uh, when you are static, when you are just near an obstacle or near someone, you want uh, to recover some space around you, to feel in some sense safer. And this is the meaning of that private space constraint. And so, what is also interesting in that framework is that it is the fact that all the ingredients I talk so far, they are supported by experimental data. So it's not just oh, I took this ingredient, this ingredient, this ingredient.
Mhm.
It is that there is really the fact that each constraint has experimental experimental uh, uh, there are some experiments that support it. So for instance, if you take the speed constraint, we ask some people to walk on a treadmill,
Mhm.
and then we measure the amount of oxygen they need to walk at some specific speed,
Mhm.
and so we could relate the energy expenditure to the desired speed. and we could also do I mean do similar stuff for the other terms. And so then you you gather all these constraints in a linear fashion under a cost function that you want to minimize to replicate an action. So that way of doing things, it's in some sense almost rational because you assume that your pedestrian or your agent is someone that is able to compute an energy and then to minimize it and to produce a decision that verifies that minimization. This is an assumption. It's also interesting in the fact that it has proven its efficiency in other areas of physics, and it's quite easy to manipulate and also to understand which term is interesting because if we can cancel one, for instance, if we are in a specific situation. So, for instance, if you are alone, then you will not have the privacy term, not the collision term. And so from a modeling point of view, it's a really interesting to manipulate it.
Mhm.
But if you speak with people from cognitive science, then they will say, "Ah, but this is near Homo economicus. This is not really what happening." Um, from then, me, what is also interesting is that I have both. I studied both side, and what is also done in neuroscience to try to to model an agent that is not really rational, that is almost rational. We can introduce some bounded rationality. So you can, for instance, say that you introduce another constraint on the decision, for instance, on your ability to process information from outside. For instance, you can say, "Oh, I am almost blind, so I can't process all the information, and so there is a lack of information. And so, for instance, instead of interacting with some amount of people, I will maybe just interact with the one that is in front of me because I see him the best." But, so you can try to introduce some bounded rationality in that way. But also, there are others that say, "No, this is not how we make decision." But I think that, and so some they will say that we rely on heuristics, so on smaller schemes that we are rules that we use on some specific situation. And to my and then and some they will say that, for instance, as a particular case, um, but you could in the north end there is a decision making under risk task. So in which you simply ask someone to choose between two different prospects, and you can and then you can propose the guy either do you want a sure prospect, so a sure amount of money. So if I give you $100 now, or if you place that bet and you can win 200, but with probability 0.5. So
Mhm.
you ask the guy to choose between these two prospects, and what is happening is that most of the people they will choose the sure prospect. This is a risk aversion.
Mhm.
So you can explain risk aversion by simply say people that are risk averse, and then they will as a rule of thumb, they will just rely on that rules, and they will always. But this is not so. This so this is but and then you can apply some kind of reasoning in also to of example in the crowd behavior. For instance, you can say that when there is a people, a guy, an individual in front of you, then you move to the left. I mean, or to the right with some rules. The problem is that um, so maybe these approaches, I don't think they are they are all wrong. I think that in some some for some specific purposes it it works, and for other it doesn't work, and I think they are complementary.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is no. I forgot who said it, but there is a scientific saying that there is no perfect model, but there are
Exactly.
some models that can make certain assumptions, um, so good assumptions about certain cases. So therefore, actually, decision making. Why I say it's scary in a not a bad way, of course, in a good way, and also in a it could go in a worse way. In a good way, I mean, we are all risk averse in when we are in outside in the city, because if you are driving, you try to avoid any collision or to have some accidents, because tax, or you don't want to have any cost to cover all these expenses, and therefore you try to be more risk averse. In addition to that, of course, you don't want to risk anyone's life. You want to be a safe driver. With the crowd, I guess it's the same, because when we are behaving in the street, we are all risk averse. We don't want to cause danger or have any cause any issue. We want to just avoid all of this danger, or like when in a big crowd as well, um, the behavior that we are doing perhaps in a crowd, mostly subconsciously, we're just moving around, but a lot of subconscious moving around, and um, at certain point could cause some problem, as you were saying, that we may have some issues, and there were, like before, some issues, actually, people dying. So I think this is somehow, it's very essential in your research, has a big importance in the application of um, for the cities, and for um, the urban planning as well. So I mean, just listening to this, I'm just learning a lot about that. Our urban planning, we don't take it into account in the daily life. We seem to walk and just see the traffic light and just obey, and but this is all well thought, studied, and researched.
But you know that, but so it is studied, but by researchers. But then when you ask people in in the real world who are really doing managing the flow and uh, building some traffic lights, it's not really like that. They have some rules,
Uh-huh.
practical rules that usually work um, in most cases, but in some cases it doesn't work, and precisely is most of the time these cases which can lead to big disaster. And is there is a need of some researchers with a rational
Mhm.
background, having um, with some studies, let's say.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think it's also particularly a great timing for researchers to come into these topics, because now we have a big data collection with the
Mm.
CCTV cameras.
But, but also, it's yeah. Also, there is also the fact that it can be quite difficult to combine or to merge the different scale of modeling,
Uh-huh.
because when you study at crowds, you zoom at a specific portion of the crowd. You can also try to understand what are the flows of people inside the city. And this is also different, quite different, and trying to merge this different scale for the moment, it is not clear how to do it in an efficient way. It's quite hard. And so, it's we we would like maybe to have, something rational to say that, "Oh, we want to put that traffic light at that point, that pedestrian way at that point."
Mm.
But then we don't really, we can't really precisely know
Yeah,
what will be the effect, and
because
so most of the moment it's just
yeah, that's
impractical.
also sorry to interrupt. That's also in the modeling. We have a long history of that. No model could be perfect, and it's actually just can be implemented in certain problems as long as they are designed to predict and for urban planning to avoid collisions, to prevent the risks, as long as they are designed in this good meanings to save humans' life, to avoid harm. I think that's very good. But if that is going to be used in a way of manipulation or of the I think that's quite dangerous. They're very now the line is very thick, but the better gets the tools, I think it's going to thin out, and then yeah, uh, it's just I
Mm,
think that's
but
yeah just a big topic to think about. But so, what are the main insights have you gained in the overall understanding of complex collect, collective dynamics to be implemented in real world scenarios? Such as urban planning and event management to improve safety and efficiency in crowded environments.
yeah, so this is about what I retain, what I remember from what I studied. And so from my point of view, I would say that what is really interesting is a way of modeling the stuff, the whole subject, and how to from a lot of different topics to manage to merge these topics into a single, let's say, model. And this is possible with that coupling between decisional layer and mechanical layer, with a decisional part, which involves the minimization of a cost function that relies on some psychological factor, but also biomechanical constraint. And that way of modeling it, the system that gather, psychological factor, but also sociological, because you can introduce some the sociology of crowds. They study how people they know at which schedule they do the stuff, and at which place people are going. And so what is interesting is to have a quantity, a way of modeling, a framework that you can use for different, that is quite powerful. I think that's the main thing to remember. And then from practical things, practical is from very practical point of view. As soon as you see in streets uh, uh, convergent flows, so flows that will potentially merge, that could be very dangerous. If you have, even if you say in your mind, "Oh, but it's very simple. You just have to go slower and maybe to change direction, to open a new path, and then go take that path. But the problem is that in reality, it's not that simple. And people, they most of the time they walk, but in an automatic way. You know, they do, they don't really rationalize all the action, and so it's not in reality it's not at all what we could think in first approach. So the merging flows and also the bottleneck situation. So as soon as you have a bottleneck, you have to keep in mind that it could happen that there is a problem. Maybe not now, maybe not in an hour, but maybe sometimes there will be a big problem with that bottleneck.
I'm looking because looking at your thesis work and as well like by giving explanation, uh, maybe I'm a little bit futuristic. I'm just thinking that this research seems to me that the somehow the very futuristic movies that I watch, so the decision making is being advised by AI or by an assistant, by robot assistant. So I think it somehow looks to me that this whole research, um, if it keeps going in this way, that somehow it could be an input for the AI. It would be an algorithm that would feed the AI to advise the people. I might be too much futuristic. Right? I'm not.
But you know that there is one experiment that so you take it's a very simple experiment. So you take a ring, so like a road that has the shape of a ring,
Mhm,
then you put some cars in that ring, and you ask so it's you ask them to so there is a driver in each car, and you ask them to go at some speed. So if you let the system like this,
mhm,
then you will have the emergence at some point of stop and go waves. So stop and go waves, it's simply little jumps that propagates backwards in space.
mhm,
And the idea is that, but there are some experiments in which they introduce into that ring one automatic vehicle. So you just implement in the vehicle a rule, so a policy that say you slow down and you go at some specific velocity, but which is, let's say, slower. And doing so, you can dump the stop and go ways, and you can go to regular flows. But the problem is that you can also ask them to regulate the space between each cars, and you can also, or there are other who ask them to regulate the time gap, so the time needed for a car to reach the position of the neighboring car going at constant speed. But the problem is that as soon as you introduce more, so more than one automatic car, then you don't dump the oscillations, so the stop and go waves. And so it's not clear if with automatic behavior we solve all the problem, because even with a simple model, as soon as you have interaction, then weird stuff can happen.
mhm, mhm,
It's, it's really it's very complex even in very simple settings. And so with AI, I have a friend so in Toulouse who is trying to predict crowd trajectories using AI, and and it doesn't work for some. It works, but he managed to predict only a few seconds, so it's almost nothing. and in the very simple scenario, so just people unidirectional flow. So and even with this very simple scenarios, there are big troubles. So for the moment, it will not. I mean, I don't think it will solve some problems. But what could be interesting is simply to assist assist us to monitor the flows in live or to track, you know. But rely on AI as a tool to you know to manage your life, then I don't think it will. It's working from now for
Yeah,
the moment.
n- but we should also remember that actually relative history, relatively, the invention of the technologies, AI is very, 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 relatively very young. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
and,
think
look, I think so. Yeah.
yeah, and yet being young, but being implemented already in all aspects of our life, I think uh,
Mm.
this already, to be honest, with this technology that with a very little development, such a young stage, uh, yeah, it already scares me what it is capable of in a few years. So it's, um, I guess, all right. I will come back again to uh, the decision making. So based on your study of decision making and collective behavior, how much influence does the surrounding crowd have on individuals' decision? This is a more philosophical question. Are people easily swayed by group movement, or do they retain a strong sense of independent choice? But looking that, and also hearing what you're saying, that it's still hard to predict people's movement, I'm pleased that this is not the case, perhaps, but what is your personal perspective? Does modeling human behavior reduce people to predictable agents, or does it reveal deeper patterns of complexity in our choice?
Yeah, here, so yeah, so there is it's a question about also will or people are influenced by each other, and this. What is really interesting in crowds is the fact that with a minimal assumptions on the interactions between people, you have you can have a large scale phenomenon with very weird situation. And so um, it's interesting because you don't really need to assume that there is the guy is influenced by all the crowd and stuff like that. And even with these simple assumptions that in the 1D systems, the ring, that you interact only with the guy in front of you, even with this, you have things that are quite unpredictable. But then there is uh, I have to yeah to maybe to put quota in quotation in the fact that it is unpredictable, because we can always try replicate, you know, some specific observables. For instance, we can replicate density, we can replicate mean time gap on many observables, but we are not able to replicate the exact trajectories or the detailed trajectories of each people. So what is interesting is that with a crowd system or with a car assembly of car, we can replicate some average quantity, but we are not able to replicate the details of each behaviors.
Mm.
So it's not because there is you know, um, the crowd is controlled, it's monitored, so it's known in some let's say limits, but in other limits it's completely unknown.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I think it's also like a good point that you mentioned at the last is that we don't perhaps. Yeah, my question is perhaps somehow it's inspired by some futuristic movies that it could be either gone really bad or either gone really good. But I think when it comes to the research, real decision making, we have certain research aims, and what our aim is mainly having a safe environment in urban planning and also preventing the risk. So in that sense, I guess maybe it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to. We don't have to predict everything. We just have to make sure that this certain traffic behavior or crowd movements are in a safe position. That is actually mainly your research is trying to address, I guess. But
but maybe sorry for interrupting you, but there is also the fact that uh, the material of humans, let's say, if you can call it like this,
Mhm.
has there is some things that are predictable in the behavior. Otherwise, if we have which can be understood, but if we could also think that we could also have found maybe that our pedestrians they have erratic behavior, they don't think, and so they but then it would still be interesting. But you know, it's and then you could also still design some specific areas that are that fit to that kind of behavior.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
ethical.
Perhaps I can here say because my studies in also in before it was in soil sciences, and we also work with microorganisms. Microorganisms are as well individually behaving differently. It's a very chaotic. Um, One can debate if they have a free will. No, of course. But when the microorganisms are reacting to the environment, there are certain behaviors. So what we really look into is the potential of um, based on this environment, we assume certain reaction from them or certain behavior. So I think I might be wrong, but it seems to me that when it comes to crowd behavior, it somehow looks the same. That we have to look at the potential of um, a certain behavior, like um, in a large scale, not in an individual scale.
Yeah, but also, yeah, exactly. So when it comes to large scale, then we can you know, average things. We can find some suitable observables that we can replicate. Whereas when at the individual scale, and even if it is at no, very small densities,
Mhm.
and it's more psychological point of view, studies, way of studying crowds that maybe are more suitable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that comes to my next question. Of course, as a person who really promotes science or is interested in science, well, in recent discoveries by Robert Sapolsky, it was told that there is no free will. There is no such as a free will. Of course, he has a very um, science-based studies that where he's a neuroscientist and neurobiologist, I guess. Yeah, Robert Sapolsky. I will put him also in the screen. And reading his books before, I believed him. Okay, at a certain point, perhaps we don't have free will, but of course, I can choose my daily meal, make certain decisions. But yeah, that's interesting. But as a person who was doing who has a background in physics and they have statistics and also neuroscience, and you've been working in field, you've been working on the modeling, you've been interacting with many people from different backgrounds. So do you believe in free will?
So for me, it's a bit provocative because I think we need to define precisely what is free will. Because, for instance, if you look at people who are doing in neuroscience, there are some studies in which they define the free will, as simply the fact that you are aware, so consciously aware of some initiated muscular movement. So, for instance, I say that, oh, I will move my hand,
Mhm.
but actually they measured that you are aware of the fact of moving your hand after
Brain
you,
of your
you the brain command it,
yeah.
initiate it. So this is it's a bit funny, but but and but then you can also so this is from a neuroscientist neuroscientist point of view, but then you can also say from a physicist point of view, um, it is about determinism, and the free will is the absence of determinism. But the problem is that um, even in a simple physical systems, you have what is called chaotic behavior. And so the fact that if you have a little incertitude, so uncertainty in the definition of your state, then it's possible that in the uncertainty grows exponentially. This is the case with time. This is the case in chaotic behavior, and so you absolutely don't know after sometimes where, so in which state is the system. And so this happens in very basic deterministic system in physics, such as so the double pendulum. So you have a pendulum, then another pendulum which is attached to the other pendulum, but it also in other with other settings. And then if you introduce then some noise into the dynamic, then it can also, it's even more complex, and you can also have it can also be very hard to predict. I mean to so the final the sentence is that it can be quite difficult to predict the state of the system, even in simple system. But what is interesting is that in some specific case, even with very with large degrees of freedom, a system with a large degree of freedom, there are some specific states that are well defined and that remains that you can study. For instance, you can study the water. The water will remain water. You can study crowds, and you don't need to rely on specific on the behavior of the small entities or of the small particle or small agents, but you can rely on observables of macroscopic observables. This is enough to this can be enough in a lot of systems to predict their behavior, but it's so I mean I would say it depends on the scale maybe. So the notion of the free will is not clear and the definition is not very clear, but we from what I said so far, it seems that there is not, but it's we can still over 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 a small time scale. Maybe there is, because we can still choose a pizza or choose a burger,
Yeah, or
even if the action is initiated before we are aware of it.
yeah.
Maybe it's on, on small time scales.
What advice would you give to your younger self? And also, any advice for incoming PhD students?
Yeah, so I think that one advice I could give is to be try to be surrounded by people with different background, because you can learn a lot of things with people who are different, much more than from people who are like you. So yeah, I learn much more here in Lyon while surrounded by mathematicians and people who are doing informatics,
Mhm.
um, and than before. So yeah, this is, I think, a good advice, because then then if you have a problem, you can ask that guy who may be able to help you. Whereas if you are in a place where everyone has the same master, it's
Same.
most likely that it will not they will not help you.
Have you noticed like interacting with different people that your thinking also somehow variant?
Yeah, yeah. For instance, I had a big problem in at the beginning of my PhD on on a numerical problem. Then I simply asked a guy in Germany who is doing mathematics, and we uh, we we arrived to the point that there was some problem in the definition of the model, and if we slightly change the definition, then it works. So it's and um, because he was used to that kind of problems, he was able to help me. Um, even if it's if he works in a completely in different topics. And also, I had yeah, for instance, I have a friend who has background on informatics, computer science, so he was able to teach me C++. This is nice also, and if you have some problems, troubles with some topics, you can simply go and ask them for some advice, and it can be much faster than doing um, trying to learn by yourself.
Mhm, mhm.
Much
It's
faster.
C++
Mm,
is not an easy language, so I can tell.
mm, mm,
It's a good, very good benefit. Yeah.
mm.
Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, it has been a very interesting talk. I think for me to know about a completely different research aspect as well as in crowd dynamics. Of course, first I'm impressed by your background that you have a very strong background in various areas, and none of the subjects are actually easy. Physics, statistics, and neuroscience, and implementing all of this in your PhD. I think that's a great work, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of implications. Um, I got also a little bit depressed that maybe my PhD is not that much of an interesting after this, but okay. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you too. Yeah.